Hey, thanks for clicking play on Growing in the Gospel. We are in a long form teaching series called Rhythms. We're discovering the work that God does in the rhythms of our lives, the seasons and the stages, that He's present and active, that these are His appointments. He's providential, He's sovereign in our lives. And we're learning to trust Him and understand the work that He does. Today, we break into part 5. We're halfway through the series, it's 10 parts. Today, we're celebrating spring, when God finally breaks out of the winter seasons of our lives. Our text is Isaiah 35, and I'm praying that God will encourage and develop and strengthen you in His grace in the next few moments. Well, one thing about winter is it can seem long. Does it seem long yet? Some said yes, some said no. It doesn't start to seem long to me until about the end of February. And that's where psychologically it starts to press in and go, all right, is this going to break? One of my favorite series of books when I was a kid, actually when I was a young teenager, was C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia. And the first book in that series, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, begins with these Pevensey children kind of accidentally finding this land of Narnia through this wardrobe that they're hiding in, and it ends up the back of the wardrobe and enters into this, wide open space called Narnia. But Narnia is in the grip of this curse, and some of you could remember the name of the Winter Witch, but she's taken all of Narnia over and just locked it in ice, okay? It would remind you of Elsa, okay, if you're into the Disney narratives. And so Narnia is just kind of seized in the grip of this winter curse. And one of the first characters that the kids meet is a beaver who's got a really good attitude. I don't think he lives very long, but he's got a very good attitude. And I'm going to quote C.S. Lewis, because the beaver says, he's not so torn up about winter, because he says, they say, Aslan, now Aslan is the figure of Jesus in the stories. He's a lion, okay? And the beaver says, they say Aslan is on the move. Perhaps he has already landed, talking about the return of the king of Narnia. And C.S. Lewis writes, and now a very curious thing happened. None of the children knew who Aslan was any more than you do. But the moment the beaver had spoken these words, everyone felt quite different. At the name of Aslan, every one of the children felt something jump in its inside. Edmund felt a sensation of mysterious horror. Peter felt suddenly brave and adventurous. Susan felt as if some delicious smell or some delightful strain of music had just floated by her. And Lucy got the feeling you have when you wake up in the morning and realize that it is the beginning of the holidays or the beginning of summer. This is what spring is like. This is what the arrival of the season we're talking about, the rhythm we're going to talk about today in your life is like. It's like something that's been locked, frozen for a very long time has been broken free. It's like the resurgence and the renewal of everything that you thought was dead and never would come back. It comes back. This past week, after that big snow that we got earlier this past week, little Augie, who I introduced last week during the 10:30 service, he was at our house. And I just take great wonder at watching those first experiences as they start to talk and start to take it all in. And Augie had now played in the snow for the very first time. And I picked him up and I looked out the back window of the house, and the yard was, full of snow, 12, 13 inches, whatever, out there. And it just piled up. And I looked at him and I said, "What is all that? What is that?" And he looked at me and goes, "No." And I said, "What are we going to do with it all?" He said, "I don't know." I said, "It's a mess. We need to clean this up." He said, "I don't know." And it occurred to me, this thought. The biggest blessing of snow is not that it's beautiful, not that you can ski in it, not that it's fun for the kids. I thought about this. What if it didn't melt? How cool is it that God designed snow to melt? Like, how disastrous would it be if it fell and stayed, you know? And we had to invent large mechanisms and large shop vacs. I mean, it's gonna melt. And it was kind of fun trying to explain to Augie that this is gonna go away. It's gonna melt. It's gonna naturally kind of dissipate. And none of us get too riled or too uptight or too panicked about the snow because we know it was designed to melt. I would love to be in the laboratory of creation when they were test marketing this and, you know, in the R&D room. Hey, we found this beautiful stuff. All right, but what's gonna happen to it? Well, we made it dissolve. It can just go away, you know. How cool is that? Isn't God amazing? And so what I wanna say to you is, we've been studying winter for 2 weeks, and the way God designed life is that winter melts. And he talks about it in multiple places in Scripture, and I'm speaking figuratively somewhat, metaphorically. But in your outline, I think, is this verse in the introduction, Isaiah 43, 18 and 19 is a place. And Isaiah he brings a lot of spring into the winter of the message. But this is just one spot where God says, remember ye not the former things, neither consider the things of old. Behold, I will do a new thing. Now it shall spring forth. And now we're starting to get a little glimpse of where the name comes from and why we call it spring. Now it shall spring forth. Shall ye not know it? I will even make a way in the wilderness and rivers in the desert. We belong to a God who can take the most dead, the most dark, the longest, the most difficult, the most lifeless seasons, I should say, or rhythms in all of our lives, and in his time and in his way, and with his power and by his grace, he can completely reverse them. I mean, in an instant. Things that we think are impossible, things where we see no way forward, seasons and moments in life where we think it's over and it's hopeless and we would despair and maybe really be drawn into very, very bad decisions. God can, in a moment, turn it so radically, so transformationally that you don't even remember how it used to be. You don't even remember how deep and dark and desperate and desolate you felt in the winter. That's what springing forth in God's spring feels like. In spring, winter's long, desolate march is really far behind. It might have been yesterday, but in your mind and in your experience and in your emotion, it's far behind. It goes back to Psalm 90 where Moses said, God, could you swing the pendulum and could you compensate gladness in such a positive, in such plenty that it overwhelms all of the sorrow we experience for all of these years. God takes the winters of our lives and he washes them away. He breaks them apart and he melts them away to where we've forgotten what it was like. Mark Buchanan writes, Isaiah uses the desert garden image to portray a hope fulfilled, a spiritual longing coming to fruition. In essence, he tells us what it feels like when God is on the move. When God begins to, again, in our sense of it, in our experience of it, that he begins to move forward again in our lives. God changes everything and utterly with breathtaking swiftness. The impossible, I love this, the impossible becomes the inevitable. The desert turns to a garden. Where death reigned, life triumphs. Now, maybe you're in winter, maybe you remember a winter, maybe you are experiencing this right now, or you will soon. But the experience of staring at something that's impossible and then seeing in short time God, I mean, in a way that only God can. This is the most remarkable part of the journey with God, is seeing him do it in a way that only he could have. So you can't take credit. It wasn't your plan. It wasn't your ingenuity. You didn't get yourself out of winter. All of a sudden, God broke through and God did a work. It's why we call it spring. You finally feel like you're winning after a long season of losing. The word spring originates from an Old English word, springen, which means to leap, to burst forth, to fly up, to spread, to grow. Before spring was called spring, it was called Lent, which also was an Old English word relating to the lengthening of days. Lent was the lengthening of days. Starting in the 14th century, it was called springing time, in reference to the plants springing up from the ground. In the 15th century, it was shortened to springtime, and then it was further shortened in the 16th century to just spring. And when spring springs forth, it springs forth from what? From death, from dryness, from barrenness. It arrives from the least likely of places and from the most unpromising of circumstances. And Isaiah describes the greatest of all springs in Isaiah 35. Are you there? Isaiah 35? Join me there. What he's going to describe is the final spring, okay? The ultimate spring. This is the spring that God brings in the final, ultimate, eternal kingdom. This is after all of time and space and all of God's plans are done in this life, and we are in heaven, and the millennial reign is over, and the final judgment is over, and death and Satan and sin have been banished forever, and God breaks forth. Now, what you need to know before we read the chapter together is that the first 34 chapters of Isaiah are rather dark. They're filled with judgment. They're filled with expressions of wrath and justice. And God is this perfect, holy, righteous, balanced being, okay? He is perfectly just and perfectly good. And so for 34 chapters, he says, I'm a just judge and I'm going to right the wrongs. I'm going to deal with sin. I'm going to confront injustice. I'm going to pour out judgment and wrath in ways that are not human, by the way. Break that apart from your mind. These are not human emotions. These are God qualities, and they're perfect. So his wrath is right. It's righteous. It's loving. It's good. His judgments are right, righteous, perfect. His sense of justice is excellent. Nobody at God's judgment will be able to fault him or call him unjust or unfair or unreasonable. Everybody will know. All of it will be brought into the light of day, and judgment will be perfect and pure and right. So the first 34 chapters, though, are heavy. They're judgment related. They're God saying, I'm going to deal with a world, with a planet that has rebelled against me. But then you turn the page to chapter 35, and I want you to read it with me, because this chapter teaches us not just about the eternal kingdom that we're all invited into. It teaches us about the heart of God. It teaches us how he thinks. He is an all-powerful, righteous judge, but he is gentle and loving and compassionate and merciful and long-suffering. He is always working for your ultimate and eternal good and your best interest. He loves you, okay? And so this picture of this future spring, this eternal spring, to me is, we get foretastes of this. We get appetizers. We get, every time God brings a spring into our lives, and you're going to experience this over and over and over, what we're going to talk about today, it is a reminder of what it comes imperfectly many times into our lives, that which will one day come perfectly and permanently. And so let's read it together. The wilderness and the solitary place shall be glad for them, and the desert shall rejoice and blossom as the rose. So all these paradoxes, wilderness, barren, deserted, solitary, aloneness. And I want you to be thinking in your mind, if you were tracking with the last 2 weeks, Psalm 88, these two chapters, when you lay them against each other, they are almost polar opposites. They're almost mirror images. Because Haman last week in Psalm 88 talked about being desperate and desolate and alone and forsaken and feeling like God had cast him away. And now God describes the wilderness and the solitary place being glad places. And the desert rejoicing and blossoming, coming to life. It shall blossom abundantly. So not just a little bit, but it explodes with blossoms, explodes with life. abundantly, and rejoice even with joy and singing. The glory of Lebanon shall be given unto it, the excellency of Carmel and Sharon. These are lush, flourishing places near the Holy Land. And what God is, and if you ever go to the Holy Land, you'll see the land is stark. There's lush, some parts of it are lush and flourishing and fruitful, and other parts of it are just desolate and barren. And we're talking about within an hour's drive. You go from one to the next. And so the contrast and the visual, the imagery that God's creating here would have been really familiar to them. The lush regions of Sharon and Lebanon compared to the barren desert wilderness that wasn't far away. So Carmel and Sharon, they shall see the glory of the Lord and the excellency of our God. Strengthen ye the weak hands and confirm the feeble knees. Say to them that are of a fearful heart, be strong, fear not. Now you got to remember, by chapter 35, there would have been a lot to fear. There would have been a lot to worry about. So God comes in and talking to the redeemed, talking to believers, talking to those that have accepted his atonement on their behalf. And we'll come to that in a minute. Say to them that are fearful, be strong, fear not. Behold, your God will come with vengeance. Even God with a recompense. He will come and save you. You see, as God is pronouncing judgment on those that are unrepentant, those that have chosen to resist him at all costs, no matter what, they'll never trust God. They don't want him. They know he's real, they know he's true, but they reject him. In the middle of all of that, there are people going, well, but we love you, God, we want you, we do trust you. And so God speaks to them and says, don't be afraid, be strong. I will come with a recompense, with vengeance. I'm going to come and save you. Then, now here's spring, verse 5. Then the eyes of the blind shall be opened, and the ears of the deaf shall be unstopped. Then shall the lame man leap as an hart, and the tongue of the dumb shall sing. For in the wilderness shall waters break out, and streams in the desert. There's this explosion, there's this resurgence of healing and strength and vitality and life. Jesus, in his 3 years of earthly ministry, showed us again an appetizer, a foretaste, a foreshadowing. When Jesus shows up, people are healed, the dead are raised, the deaf hear, the blind see, life resurges because of his touch, because of his presence. This is the heart of God. God brings life out of death. God brings resurrection after crucifixion. God brings us out of winter. If you're in winter, there's coming an explosion of life, and it's probably not as far away as you feel like it is. Look at verse 7. The parched ground shall become a pool, and the thirsty land springs of water. Now, these are impossible things. When you're in the deserts of Israel, when you travel south from Galilee an hour or two, and you start to get to where the Dead Sea is, it's the most, and I lived in the desert a long time, this is the most barren land I've ever seen. It is just, it's stark, it's sand, it's barrenness, it's dust. The Dead Sea is just a body of salt water that's just a nasty body of water. It is just repulsive. And you can't imagine in any of that region, like Jericho is just this dusty, filthy town. And it's not a place you want to spend a lot of time. And it's really hard to imagine what's being described in this desert place. In those barren hills where Jesus went when he was tempted, that barren wilderness, it's hard to imagine any pool of water existing or springing up. It's hard to imagine fresh water and an oasis of blossom and life coming out of any of that. It's an impossibility, but God says, but it's going to happen. Parched ground shall become pool, thirsty land, springs of water. In the habitation of dragons, those are desert creatures, where each lay shall be grass with reeds and rushes, and an highway shall be there, and a way, and it shall be called the way of holiness. The unclean shall not pass over it, but it shall be for those, the wayfaring men, though fools, shall not err therein. No lion shall be there, no threat, nor any ravenous beast shall go up thereon. It shall not be found there, but the redeemed shall walk there. Let's read verse 10 out loud together if you're in the room. Ready, go. And the ransomed of the Lord shall return and come to Zion with songs and everlasting joy upon their heads. They shall obtain joy and gladness, and sorrow and sighing shall flee away. So, 4 things when it comes to celebrating spring. You still there? I want you to write them down. The experience of spring invading our lives, rushing into our lives. I want to just press through them quickly. The first is a renewal of life and abundance and happiness. A renewal of life and abundance and happiness. Winter leaves, if you remember Psalm 88, it left life dormant. It seemed like there was no hope. Everything seemed dead. And let me sidebar and contextualize and frame this. We are talking about rhythms of life that come and go, like ocean waves, like your breaths, like your heartbeats. We're not talking about stages of life in terms of age brackets. We're talking about the recurring cycles. We've said already, there's going to be many times in your life, you come into a winter, you walk through a winter with God, you wonder what he's doing or where he went. You covered all that. You wonder if it's ever going to end. And they're coming and they're going to go. They're going to come and go. They're going to flow in and flow out. Just expect them. It happens, okay? And they're of all sizes and shapes. And there's all kinds of contributing factors to them. They're not always deep and dark and desolate. Sometimes they come and go and they're relatively mild. Last winter in Connecticut was relatively mild. It wasn't very snowy and icy. It was mostly warm and wet. In fact, it kind of was, some of you were like, where's winter? I really was wanting a better one than this, you know. So they're all sizes and shapes. They come and go. And so is spring. Spring is going to come and go. And it's going to come and go many times in your life. And in many contexts of your life. And I really need you to think, to let these ideas seep into all the roles of your life. Okay, let me give you, for instance. Your marriage is going to come through winters and out of winters. Your marriage is going to come into spring times. You're going to fall back in love over and over and over again. It was a huge day in my life where I realized that reality in a marriage, that it's a long road and there's a lot of seasons. Jeff Redlin last year at our marriage event said, my wife has been married to me for, I forget how many years he said, 30 years or so. And he said, but I have been at least 4 or 5 different men in the course of that journey. And so our marriage has come through seasons. And the same can be said about the wife. You grow, you change. You're not the person you were season to season. You're growing. And God is using these seasons to shape something. And so it is so important that we expect them, we anticipate them, when we understand just the nature of a loving relationship like marriage, understanding that there's a cycle to it, that there's a rhythm to it. Change the whole idea for me. Because coming into a winter season in a relationship doesn't mean it's over, doesn't mean your love is dead, doesn't mean that what it means is that your roots are going deeper and your love is getting stronger. And that spring is going to come back. You're going to experience that all over again. And by the way, I would say this. Some of you that are older than me in the room, you might be thinking, well, I'm coming through my own winter of age, but you're coming into the greatest spring. Your spring is going to be the best ever. You might be thinking you're closing the chapters and winding things down. No, you're just approaching the starting line. You're coming into the best spring you could possibly imagine as God describes it here. So understand this, whatever it is, whether it's your job, your career field, the development of your career, whether it's the development of your education, whether it's your spiritual growth in your personal walk with the Lord, or your family, or your marriage, or other relationships, or other responsibilities and opportunities in your life, you're going to come through winters where you feel like you've lost energy, you've lost strength. Maybe the door is closing and the opportunity is going away, and it's a sense of death. But then you're going to come into a renewal. And there's going to be a renewal of life and abundance and happiness. Look at it again. The wilderness, the solitary place, are glad. The desert, rejoicing and blossoming. All of this, again, literal and figurative. Yeah, there really will be literal blossoms in the desert, but in the desert places of our lives, there will again be growth. There will again be life. So you don't give up in the desert or on the desert. You understand, no, this is what God does. God brings us and leads us into wilderness and desert places, and he's going to show us how he brings life into those desert places. Verse 2, there shall blossom abundantly, it says. It shall blossom abundantly. I'm trying to grasp for personal illustrations that I can share with you, and I know that many in our church are single adults, so please forgive me for reaching for marriage every time. I don't mean to leave you out. That's not my intention. It's just a good metaphor. It's a good example of the sense of the resurgence of life and abundance. The more winters you go through in a marriage, the stronger and more beautiful and greater your springs become. You learn to love each other better than you ever, stronger and more than you ever thought you could. Your love grows stronger and stronger with every passing winter, every passing spring, every new blossom. And in winter you think, do I still love this person? Does this person still love me? And on a dime, you can't believe how much you still love them. And this can be true about your walk with God. You can go through a winter and go, where did he go? He must have forsaken me. Oh, well, I guess I tried Christianity. It didn't work for me. And you could be a day, a week, a month away from a kind of revival in your soul and spirit that brings God close again, and the sense and experience of, wow, look at what God's done. It's happened so many times in my life personally. I was thinking this morning as I was getting ready, I've been a follower of Jesus for almost 45 years. And if I had to estimate how many times this rhythmic pattern has happened spiritually, just in my walk with Christ, I want to say 100. I mean, at least 75 or 80 times in my life, I've come to just this wintry spiritual, and I would say the first 5 or 10 times, I thought I was doing something wrong. What's wrong with me? After 8 or 10 times, I realized, oh, this is normal. Like winter is normal. And when I'm here, I'm going to anticipate, pretty soon I'll be back in spring with God. Pretty soon, the Bible's going to make sense again. Pretty soon, God's going to be teaching me with fresh delight. I'm going to be learning all over again. There's going to be a renewal of that first love, that what I once fell in love with in Jesus and in the gospel. In the winter, it feels distant, but in the spring, it's right back to life, just like it was when you first got saved. So there's a renewal of life and abundance and happiness. I love where God promised in Joel 2, I will restore to you the years that the locusts have eaten. Verse 26 of that chapter says, ye shall eat in plenty and be satisfied and praise the name of the Lord your God that hath dealt wondrously with you. So winter's the time you're wondering, what's God doing with me? And then on a dime, you're going, wow, God has done wonderful things for me. And it can change that fast. This is how God works. He brings us through and he brings us into spring. So renewal of life, abundance, and happiness. I want you to see, secondly, the resurgence. This is powerful to me. The resurgence of clarity and hope and courage. The resurgence of clarity and hope and courage. Winter, Psalm 88, clouded our vision. We couldn't see God. We couldn't see him at work. In fact, if you remember, in the end of Psalm 90, Moses said, God, we've been wandering in this wilderness, and we really want to see you at work again, so our children can see your glory. God, let us see your work. If you remember the end of Psalm 90. So there was this blinding experience. And Haman's account in Psalm 88, he didn't see where God had gone and where he was at. A loss of vision and a depletion of hope, a sense of despair. But look at the end of verse 2 in Isaiah 35. So the land blossoms, there's joy, there's abundance. And the end of verse 2 says, they shall see the glory of the Lord and the excellency of our God. You can't see his glory in the winter season. You wonder what's going on in your life and why isn't God coming through for you in winter? And in spring, you can't help but see God coming through. He moves pieces, and all of a sudden, everything once again becomes clear. They shall see the glory of the Lord. And this brings a new strength. Strengthen ye the weak hands and confirm or firm up the feeble knees. The weakness that winter brought, the discouragement, the hopelessness, the sense of loss of hope. Verse 4, say to them that are of a fearful heart, be strong, fear not. Behold, your God will come with a vengeance. God is on the move. He will come with recompense. We'll come back to that idea of recompense in a minute and vengeance in a minute. He will come and save you. So this resurgence of clarity and hope and courage. All of a sudden, in winter, you're fearful. Where is this leading? You're kind of seized up with kind of panic. The spring resurgence floods courage. Oh, God's got my back. God's got this. I was sharing with a friend yesterday, the early years, our early years at Emmanuel, I would say they were, in many respects, personally, winter years. I would say there was about a 2 or 3 year winter where I was looking at impossible things. If you were here in those days, you remember this, and maybe you've heard me tell a little of the story. We had 6 months for God to basically double our budget as a church. Otherwise, we were going to have to sell this whole building. And I didn't know that till I got here, which was my own fault. I told the deacons and finance team, I don't want to know the money problems because they'll scare me and I will run for my life. That's what winter does. It scares you. The winter seasons of life jolt you with fear. What's happening to me? Where am I? Why is this going badly? A lot of people make bad decisions during winter when they might be a week or two away from spring. A lot of people get a divorce too soon. If they'd have given it a little more time, a little more biblical reconstruction, they would come into a springtime. A lot of people walk away from God just before he would have broken through with fresh blossoms and fresh life and clarity and courage. Those early days of facing these challenges and there's still challenges that are bigger than me, but the difference between Pastor Cary in 2021 and 2012, oh, there are a million of them. That Pastor Cary was so scared. I'm still tempted to be scared. Like COVID tempted me to be scared. I was scared a little bit. But then I remembered the last winter, the 3 years. And I remember how that in less than 6 months, God met our budget needs so we didn't have to sell this building. We couldn't fix it, but at least we could keep it. You know, and there was this panic. I remember the panic attack of sitting at Dunkin' Donuts when I realized we're in big trouble. And I'm the new pastor, you know. And I thought, I got to have a church family meeting and tell everybody I'm in big trouble. We are in big trouble, not me, we are in big trouble, you know. And I remember that Sunday night. And Janie is sitting right back here. Janie, I don't know if you remember this. Do you remember walking up to me that night? I talked about the budget deficit and, you know, where we were. And I said, folks, I don't know what to do. I don't have a plan. I don't know what to do. This is impossible. But God put us together, and I believe this is his church. I believe he wants to save this church. So let's pray. Let's pray and preach the gospel. That's all I know to do. And so we prayed that night, and I got up. I felt as lonely as I've ever felt in my life. Now, I know I wasn't, but I felt that way. And Pete and Janie walked up after the service, and many others did. But this one sticks out because what Janie said that night. She walked up to me and she said, "Thank you for telling us this." She said, "You are not alone, and you do not need to bear this alone." And I just wanted to cry and hug you, but I didn't know you well enough to do that. But I was about to cry. But all of a sudden, courage because I wasn't alone. But let me tell you, those of us that have taken this 8.5-year journey together now, we've seen God. Dale, you're nodding. We've seen God break down so many impossibilities that winter doesn't scare us as bad as it used to. We've seen spring unfold enough times together that the challenges of winter, okay, they fortify us, they rally us. Okay, we got to go to prayer, we got to go deeper, but it's not going to overwhelm us. Our God's going to come with a vengeance, and he's going to save us. Aslan is on the move. And all we've got to do is push through, and can't wait to see how he's going to break the desert into pools of water and blossoms now. Can't wait to see how he's going to break through. I'm using the stories as metaphors. You've got to apply them to your life. You know your own winter and spring right on the hinges of winter that God will bring you into. But in every aspect of life, these seasons ebb and flow. This reminds me of Isaiah 40:31. And this passage, I would say this passage has navigated me through every winter and into every spring. At least 100 times or more. Hast thou not known, hast thou not heard that the everlasting God, the Lord, the creator of the ends of the earth, fainteth not, neither is weary. There's no winter with him. There's no searching of his understanding. He giveth power to the faint, and to them that have no might he increaseth strength. Even the youths, everybody, even the youths shall faint and be weary, wintertime. And the young men shall utterly fall. There's going to be some stumbling, some limping, some pressing through life, wounded and weary. Verse 31, say it out loud if you know it or if you can read it with me. Ready, go. But they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. Wait is this active, faith-filled dependence on God. I'm not going anywhere. God's going to get me through. And there's going to be a moment where he breaks through and there's a resurgence. There's a renewing. There's a resurgence of clarity and hope and courage. I can't tell you how many times in my spiritual life, my Christian life, I've looked forward into fog. I don't feel it. It's lifeless. It's just, where am I headed? Where am I? What's going on? What do I do next? Where's the joy? Where's the abundance? Where's the blossoming? Where's the fresh water that God promised? And eventually it arrives. Eventually it shows back up. I've never been able to trace what triggers it. If I had a formula to give you, like, here's the way to end winter, here's the software program to run, here's the combination of the buttons to push, it's not that way. God controls the transition of the seasons. And maybe a groundhog that sees his shadow, I'm not so sure. Okay, number 3. A renewal of life is number 1. Number 2, a resurgence of clarity and hope and courage. Number 3, a refreshing or a repairing, maybe would be a good word, a refreshing of sense and strength and vitality. So winter dulled the senses and it depleted strength. If you remember Psalm 88, Haman said, I'm shut up and I can't come out. I can't get out of this. Well, verse 5 is a refreshing or a repairing of senses that had gone dull or dormant or inoperable. The eyes of the blind are opened, the ears of the deaf unstopped. Now again, there's a literal sense to this. Yeah, Jesus did this. But there's also a figurative sense in our lives that where there was no clarity, where we felt we were walking blind, suddenly God makes a way. And it becomes clear. The path becomes clear. Suddenly, where we would read the Bible and we didn't really hear God, and we'd sit in church and felt numb, that we weren't getting anything out of it, Suddenly, there's life again, and we're hearing again. And we're seeing God at work in our lives, and we're hearing him teach us and instruct us. Then shall the lame man leap as in a hart, and the tongue of the dumb sing. For in the wilderness shall break waters out and streams in the desert, and the parched ground shall become a pool and thirsty. What do you think of when you think of water? Revitalization, a resurgence of energy, a replenishing of strength. And like Jesus restored physical strength and vitality when he walked the earth, so he will lead you into a spring where there really is, physically even, a resurgence of vitality. I don't know if you've ever experienced this. Transparently, I know this. When I come into winter seasons, there's a physical impact to it. I'm not talking about weather. Again, I'm talking about those times of life that are just hard. They drain you. There is a physical component to it. I don't pretend to totally understand it. There is, maybe medical people in the room can understand it better. I can tell you this, spiritual strength and emotional and relational strength, that psychological strength, somehow has a connection to our physiology as well. It impacts us physically. Let me give you a little illustration. I'll go home after preaching 3 times on a Sunday, and I'm thinking, what did I do? I stood up and talked. Like, how tired can that make me? But I literally sometimes will just lay on the couch, and I'll be like, Dana, I can't move. Just bring me food. Just like my body is refusing to cooperate right now. Okay, I'm just so exhausted. And I started the series talking about those bike rides. I don't understand this. I can take a 20 or a 30-mile bike ride and have more energy at the end of that bike ride than I have after 3 times of preaching. I don't understand that. What I understand is there's an expenditure to spiritual battle, an emotional expenditure that somehow drains physical resources. So when you come into winter, you feel it physically. You don't want to do the stuff that you should do. You don't want to exercise. You don't want to eat right. You don't want to get out of bed. You don't want to turn the TV off. There's a physical component that's just like, I can't function well, okay? That's not the end of your story. That's a moment, and you need to respond to it. You need to deal with it. But when spring blossoms, there is a physical resurgence. There's a fresh vitality. And when the ultimate spring explodes, there's a new body that never can be broken, never gets sick. You'll never have to worry about a diagnosis. You'll never have a doctor. You know, the older you get, the longer your list of doctors grows. But when spring turns, you don't have any doctors. In heaven, there's no doctors. Isn't that cool? You're going to have a perfect body. You're never going to have a knee replacement or a hip replacement. Your AFib is going to be fixed. You're not going to have any cholesterol medication. It's all going to be over, and it's going to be an eternal, forever blossoming spring of energy. And you're going to be, people that haven't run in decades are going to run and leap, God says. Number 4, and finally, there's a return to, and I just love this, there's a return to and a resumption of my journey with God. And again, it's not like our journey stopped in winter, but it feels like it stopped. And spring, it feels like you're on the move again. Spring feels like God's brought motion back into your life. Again, he's always working. We sang that. You never stop working. And we said it, he's doing a very deep work in winter, but it's not a work we're experiencing. And so when we begin to feel that again, when we begin to experience that forward momentum, winter seemed to prevent that forward journey or the loss of a sense of it, that God has abandoned me was the sense of it. But look at verse 8. And an highway shall be there and a way. Now let me just pause and talk about that for a minute. Again, Holy Land, rough country, before mass transportation, before gas-powered vehicles. You're talking horseback, you're talking traveling on foot, and you're talking rough country to have to walk. It's rocky, it's hilly, it's barren and desolate and hot, and getting to and from in that part of the world would have been, in some places, impossible, but always difficult. Always very difficult. So anywhere in Scripture where God talks about clearing the path or going before you and making crooked places straight, the idea there is the geography of the Holy Land is winding, rocky, uphill paths. Jesus' life, he lived in Nazareth. Nazareth was at the top of this rocky, just like a Grand Canyon-like hike. And coming in and out of Nazareth would have been something like hiking in and out of the Grand Canyon. It's just a barren rock precipice that Nazareth sits up inside of. And coming down into Galilee or coming down Jerusalem would have been arduous, downhill and back uphill. Remember in Nazareth where he was preaching and they dragged him out of the synagogue and they took him out to the cliff and they were going to throw him down and kill him. That's how Nazareth is. It's up on a precipice and it's rocky and gnarly. It would be horrible to have to walk it. And so that's the idea. And Isaiah says God's going to make a highway. There's going to be a journey that these people take, and he's going to make a way. The way is going to be clear. The way is going to be accessible. And it shall be called the way of holiness. And that's a beautiful picture. Look at the next phrase. The unclean shall not pass over it. So this is a journey that only certain people take. And they're people who have been made clean. They're people that have been made holy by God. So we'll come back to that. Unclean, whatever that means, shall not pass over it. But it shall be for those, the wayfaring men, the journeying men, the walking people, that's us. Though fools, that's us too. Though we are prone to wander and make our own mistakes, they shall not err therein. God says, yeah, I'm going to save error-prone people, and I'm going to put them on a path that's error-proof. I'm going to put them on a path that is resilient and durable and recoverable and unlosable, and they can never get off of it. They can never fall off of this path once they're on it. Do you see where we're going here? This is the gospel. This is Isaiah's view of the gospel. God is going to come with a vengeance and save me. He's going to reclaim me. He's going to resurge me to life. He's going to put me on a path through this life that is a holy path. I've been exonerated. I've been declared just by God. I've been declared clean by God. He's going to call them in a minute ransomed. And that path is a permanent path. I can't fall or be taken off of that path. It's the same as Romans 8. We cannot get away from the love of God, okay? Height, depth, nor any other creature shall be able to separate me from the love of God. Once I know God, you can never take me out of his hands. Once I'm on the way of holiness, once I've been declared ransomed and been declared clean, I can't be declared unclean. I can't fall away from it. So there's eternal security embedded into this journey. And there's no fear of threat. No lion. Satan is as a roaring lion who walketh about seeking whom he may devour. I don't need to go through life being afraid of Satan. I need to be aware, but I don't need to be afraid of him. The ransom lion shall be there, no ravenous beast shall go thereupon. It shall not be found, but the redeemed shall walk therein. I want you to remember that word redeemed. So we see these people have been declared holy. They've been declared clean versus unclean. They've been declared redeemed versus unredeemed. These are all gospel terms. Verse 10, and the ransomed. That's the definition of redeemed, ransomed. The ransomed of the Lord shall return. This is talking about to Jerusalem. Zion is a hill in Jerusalem. And come to Zion. And that will be in this day a new Jerusalem, a brand new, permanent, forever Jerusalem, with songs and everlasting joy upon their heads. So we're going to be singing our way into Jerusalem, crowned with joy. They shall obtain joy and gladness, and sorrow and sighing shall flee away. So an eternal, forever spring for anybody who's redeemed, ransomed, declared holy and clean, but also a picture of what spring is like when God begins to move me forward again, and I begin to really experience and see visibly, that's what I'm driving at, God at work. While in winter, there's a gap between our knowledge and our experience. We said this a couple weeks ago. Our knowledge of God and our experience of him, there seems to be a disparity. Spring brings them back together. All of a sudden, I'm experiencing everything God's promised, having come through winter. There's a passage in Song of Solomon 2, and I don't have time to expound it like I'd like to, but it's a beautiful passage, and it's a picture of a perfect, loving relationship between a man and his wife, but it's also a picture of Jesus' love for us. And there's this moment where the man says to the wife, she says, "My beloved spake and said unto me." So she's recounting what her husband said to her. And here's what he said: "Rise up, my love, my fair one, and come away. For lo, the winter is past, and the rain is over and gone, and the flowers appear in the earth, and the time of singing of birds is come, and the voice of the turtle is heard in our land." And there's a picture there in that story of Jesus coming to you in your winter, and it's like he's whispering to your spirit, "Hey, rise up. Winter's done. You lived, you survived, and now I'm going to take you forward, and I'm going to show you all the work I've been doing underground in your winter season. It's going to come to life, and it's going to be undeniable. It's going to be unmistakable. It's going to be remarkable. You're going to tell the story. You're going to tell others the story. You're going to say, I can't believe how God blossomed my desert, how he brought life out of death, how he did these amazing things, and so rapidly and so beautifully." Winter is hard, and then one day it breaks open, and life abounds. And the only explanation of spring, when God brings spring, the only explanation is, look what God did. Look what God did. And I love the words. I want to go back very quickly to two things: vengeance and recompense. Spring brings vengeance on everything that oppressed you in winter. Think of the emotional, relational, psychological, physical oppression of a winter season. Spring brings vengeance from God on all of that. Spring brings vindication. God writes a story where he was right and all of your enemies are wrong, and justice is done. Author James Buchanan writes, "Jesus reserves his deepest intimacy for winter, but he displays his greatest handiwork in spring. He brings living water into thirsty lands, emotional strength to faltering hearts, physical wellness to the sick and the lame." And as I said, for me personally, these have been many in my lifetime. I'm sure there'll be many to come. And they are reminiscent of David's prayer in Psalm 51. "Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit. Restore unto me the joy of thy salvation." Where winter is sort of a loss of that joy, or at least the sense of it, spring is the restoration of that joy. "And uphold me with thy free spirit." Spring is when God renews a right spirit within you. Bad spirit is done away with. Self-pity, carnality, cynicism, bad things are broken through. Pessimism turns to joy, cynicism turns to hope, anger dissipates into peace, scorn and resentment releases into forgiveness, bad attitudes morph into good ones. And it's a work that God does if we let him. So my application very quickly, and there have been many in the message, but my closing application to believers. And this draws me far forward in the New Testament to James. James chapter 5. Now James was pastoring the church of Jerusalem, and not long after he wrote these words, he was thrown down off the pinnacle of the temple and martyred. He was murdered by Jews in Jerusalem that hated him. But before he was martyred, before he lost his life, he wrote these words: "Be patient, therefore, brethren, unto the coming of the Lord. Behold, the husbandman waiteth for the precious fruit of the earth." The farmer waits for the fruit. "And hath long patience until he receive the early and the latter rain." He lets the whole process unfold. And then James says, "Be ye also patient. Establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord draweth nigh." Spring is coming. One way or another, spring is coming. And then to those who have never trusted Jesus as Savior, to those who are thinking, where's my place in all this? I draw you back to verse 9 of Isaiah 35, where the Bible says, "The redeemed shall walk there." And verse 10, the ransomed of the Lord shall return and come to Zion. What does it mean to be redeemed? What does it mean to be made clean? Well, Isaiah teaches us that we are all unclean, that all of our righteousness, even our good stuff, is sinful. It's laced with sin. And Romans carries that out. We are all sinful. We've all fallen short of the glory of God. So we're all guilty before God. But God, beginning way back in the Old Testament, all the way through Isaiah and into the New Testament, explained his plan of redemption, his plan to ransom us, his plan to take what is unclean about us and to wash it away, forgive it, atone for it, so that he can call us clean. And in that process, he redeems us, he ransoms us, he buys us back. Well, what did it cost? It cost the life of Jesus. God came, lived the perfect life that we could never live, and died the death we deserve to die. And on that cross, he paid the ransom. He made it accessible for us. He made the title of cleanness accessible, justification, forgiveness with God. And anybody that will come to God in faith, believing, not behaving, not trying to earn their salvation, not just being religious, trying to achieve it. No, salvation is not something you achieve, it's something you receive. It's free. And God says you can have it in faith by grace if you receive it. And when anyone comes to God and says, I realize I'm guilty, I'm sinful, I'm unclean in God's eyes. That's a humbling admission, but it's rather simple. Okay, because none of us are perfect. And that uncleanness in God's eyes condemns me, but Jesus went to the cross for me in my place as my substitute. And he takes my uncleanness and he gives me his cleanness. He takes my unrighteousness and gives me his righteousness. He takes my sin and gives me his perfection or holiness. And in that, God can pick me up and set me on the way of holiness. He can call me clean. He can redeem and ransom me. And that happens the moment you say, God, I admit I need you and I want you. I trust Jesus as my Savior. And if you have never been placed on that way, if you've never been redeemed or ransomed, then right now, wherever you are and however you're hearing the sound of my voice, I hope you'll trust Jesus and make him your Savior.
Well, I just have two closing admonitions. The first, if you are an unbeliever, be a believer. Become a believer in Jesus and tell him you're trusting him. Ask him to be your Savior. If you are a believer, then be patient. The husbandman is cultivating your life. Spring is coming. He knows how to grow you in his grace. So hold on to him and trust his work. This wraps up part 5 of our series, Rhythms. Share the series with others. Be sure to track along with the first 4 if you just happened into this video in part 6.